Honest J. Nowak. Oh yeah. A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome back to Honest J. Nowak and Flying with the Foam. So, well, only a couple more left before I have to go back to Honest J. Nowak, the original. So, I'm going to do my best to make it last. In this instance, I might as well go on ahead and continue on from where I left off based on my Modulus XL review, and not talk about the Modulus itself because, well, I already talked about it in its own separate video yesterday. Because now's the time for me to go on ahead and talk about its front end attachment. Because, well, I've already talked about the stock, which had its own blaster, the Opposer. So, that's 2 out of 3. For 3, this one is also unnamed. So, I guess it's starting to become a little more common for some deluxe blaster sets to include extra blasters as either modular attachments or as their own separate pieces, pretty much. This one is going to be called the Standoff. So, that's basically just that. There's a lot of attachments out there that happen to double as their own standalone blasters as well. I've already given the majority of the names. I mean, you have things like the Rundown, Crash Course, the Coroner, and then of course you got the Opposer, which is in the Mediator stock. But now, here comes the Standoff. Yet another one of those cases, but this one's pretty unique for what it is, because as you can see, it not only doubles as the barrel extension for the Mediator to make it the Mediator XL, but it also includes its own little, wow, foregrip. And you do so by pressing this button here to release it, so this way it can articulate downward and lock in place. That's basically your foregrip here, but guess what? No trigger on here. But here's how they got around that. You got yourself this little pump right here on the top, which actually builds up air pressure inside of an air bladder on the inside of this thing. You got 3 barrels for darts, and you have this little trigger button right here to pretty much fire the blaster. And there you go. That's how this thing is basically going to function. This is very similar to that of some blasters out there from way back in the day, like the Auto 20 and the Magstrike AS10. But it seems like in more recent years, we've been starting to get a new generation of these sort of blasters that have air bladders built into it, and you have to use a pump to build up air pressure, and then of course fire the blaster, which can release all the darts at once. So it's temporarily like a master key sort of attachment on a real firearm, which it acts like a small size shotgun to serve as a last resort, basically, if you run out of ammo. So I kind of like this idea, pretty much. I wouldn't ultimately say that other than the Mediator core blaster itself, the Standoff here, an idea that I really do like to see brought back here, and the fact that we now have one. Chances are, though, this one's probably not really the best in the industry in terms of that, because, well, let's just say the foregrip is not super reliable in most ways, because, well, it could sometimes, it's not necessarily locked in like completely, so it kind of wiggles around a bit, which can be a problem sometimes when you're using this thing for a long period of time. And there's some cases where you might have problems trying to hold on to this thing while you're pumping it, but you can usually have it done in other, well, positions pretty much. So this way, it can be easier for you to handle. I feel like that this would make a good, well, thing as a blaster attachment in a way. Then of course you can't really forget that unless you were holding it back like this, then of course, maybe if you held it back like this, then you could probably use one hand on it. But for the most part, it's not necessarily very practical. So of course it probably would be so because of how far back the button is that you'd have to use 2 hands to be able to fire this thing rather than just one. But I could always try and, well, go like this, or maybe some other technique like that. It doesn't always work though, so ultimately speaking, that's kind of what can hurt this blaster's performance and overall handling when it comes to the use of this thing overall. So that's pretty much just the bottom line right there. But I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that it's still a pretty decent blaster on its own. Or if you wanted to use this as an attachment of some sort, then it could be done. No matter what kind of blaster it is. Not just the Mediator, but I have tested it out on a few others. Partake to, well, the Corrector, for example. Or maybe something different, but overall, it's a good blaster, nice attachment, nice idea to pretty much bring back the sort of air bladder pressure system that's used in, well, priming and firing the blaster. Nonetheless, I will indeed say that it's kind of average when it comes to blaster performance and the like. And you don't really get an option to just fire each dart individually, which is also pretty hurtful to its overall score that I might give it, but nevertheless, I'm still going to point out that it's still pretty good as a modulus accessory. But let's just say that tomorrow is going to be the very end, the end of all things, for now, in Flying with the Foam history. So if you want to see that, and if you want to see more go down on my channel, then make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and stay on the Hollywood side.